Hey everybody, welcome to Our Culture. I'm Scott, and let's talk about Star Wars, because there's not anywhere near enough people trying to dissect what the hell happened with Solo and who's to blame and what went wrong and how differently it could have gone and all that stuff. Personally, I'm continually fascinated by just how we've gone from the level of goodwill that was around the likes of The Force Awakens and Rogue One through to The Last Jedi, which is one of the most divisive mainstream blockbuster movies in quite some time. And now we have Solo, which was was announced and wasn't greeted with any sort of sense of, oh my god, I can't wait to see how that's going to be. And instead was just, yeah, all right, fine, I guess you're going to do a Solo movie and we'll just see how it goes. Now, obviously, the behind-the-scenes machinations of that weren't great, and all the things that went wrong with Alden Ehrenreich's performance and having to get a person in to help him with acting coaches and firing the directors, and everything just kind of came to a head. And you could see, I mean, I remember being there at midnight, you could see the screens, there was like 20 people in my auditorium at the time, and the majority of people seem to have experienced that similar thing. People aren't bothered about this, and the Star Wars brand isn't carrying it. That whole assumption that you can just, treat the Star Wars brand quite loosely and sort of delve into it in any which way isn't holding water, and it's not proving true. And like I said, to think that Star Wars of all things, one of the biggest franchises in our entertainment history, has become a box office bomb, it's worth picking apart. So let's take a look at just exactly why Solo bombed at the box office. Number 8, the undercooked marketing. Now, in contrast to The Last Jedi, which we actually saw back in April of last year, well ahead of the December release date, which is plenty time to build some momentum, Solo only got its first trailer 3 months before the full movie was going to come out. It meant that they didn't have anywhere near as much time to sort of, tease things or make us aware of different plot points that were going to be answered, or even, necessary character traits that were going to be in the movie. It was very much indicative of the fact that behind the scenes there was all sorts of tumultuous things going on, and this was probably assumedly the earliest time that they could have shown us anything. Regardless, the marketing for Solo was nigh on non-existent leading up to those 3 months beforehand, and following that it kind of just fell back into being, here's a bunch of YouTube clips and here's a bunch of clips and things that we can try and put online to sort of stimulate up a bit of interest. But they didn't work. The Solo wasn't being talked about, especially alongside the likes of Infinity War and Deadpool 2, but we'll get to that very soon. At some point, you just kind of have to acknowledge that marketing budgets exist for a reason. As much as Star Wars can survive on its own to some degree, and very much has done for the last 3 decades, you're going to need to put some money behind a film if you want the casual audience to be interested. If you want to ensnare that wider financial consumer base, they're going to need to know why they need to care. It's not going to be just because it's Star Wars. As much as Disney might have thought that would hold water, it isn't. Number 7, the release date and the competition. Look, there's no real way to get around this. Marvel's Infinity War was one hell of a cultural touchstone. I mean, it made up the vast majority of the videos that we put out across the last few weeks, and every single one of them has performed extremely well. Nearly every single person that we know, you know, and I know, has been talking about Infinity War, whether they're planning on going to see it in the future or whether they already have. There are all sorts of theories around who died and who lived and what it means for the future of the franchise. Basically, it's everything everybody was talking about for a good few weeks after it was in cinemas. I mean, hell, it's still in cinemas. They must have been aware that putting Solo up against that can only really result in problems for the latter. Factor in Deadpool 2 and you've got another worthwhile movie that a lot of people want to see. I mean, the first Deadpool was incredibly profitable, regardless of the fact that the second one didn't do so well in the critical reviews. If you're one average consumer with one ticket price that you want to pay, you're gonna go see something other than the Star Wars movie that doesn't have any momentum behind it. Number 6, it missed the new generation appeal. So back in the 70s and 80s, obviously Luke, Leia and Han became these massive tentpole heroes for an entire generation of fans. Go to the newer movies and we've got Rey, Finn, Poe. I mean, hell, I absolutely love Kylo, and I'd say that he's a worthwhile character worth fleshing out as well. Basically, you need new characters to bring in new blood. As much as we can argue that Star Wars is a storied franchise with 30 years worth of plot potential and all sorts of world-building elements, you're not going to bring in a new, younger audience off the back of all those things. Yes, it's a legacy franchise, but you need to keep plugging new things in. Solo is kind of the absolute antithesis of appealing to the new generation. It's a character that everybody knows inside out and very many people grew up with. A lot of people have cosplayed or dressed up as Han and feel like they know his personality inside out. To do a movie based on him is to directly challenge all those years of build-up, all those fan expectations and all those fan ideals of what the character is supposed to be like. As soon as you get lost in that miasma or that void of like nothing you're going to contribute to that can come out right on the other side, there's really nowhere to go but down. Number 5, a supreme lack of confidence. So regardless of what you thought of a Han Solo prequel, at least Disney had put Phil Lord and Christopher Miller behind it. These are the guys that did 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie. They've very much got a talent for comedic presence and lightheartedness and, I don't know, fun happenstance adventures. Everything that makes up what Han Solo is as a character. It was one of the things that got fans rallying behind the idea of a prequel in the first place, even though I say rallying behind in the most minimalist sense. It was very much us going, okay, look, if you have to do this, then cool, at least these two are the right ones to go. Lo and behold, that didn't stick, and although the reason came down to apparently Lord and Miller encouraging improvisation on the set, leading to all sorts of script deviations and things that annoyed writer Lawrence Kasdan, the reality is we didn't get that initial pitch, and the whole world found out about it. This led to Ron Howard being brought in, who is of course an industry veteran, but there's only so much that he can do picking up the pieces of a project that was already in motion. It wasn't his idea from the beginning, and props to the guy for bringing it together. Solo is very much a watchable, serviceable, enjoyable film, but it lacks that sense of authorship or auteurship that we would have got if Lord and Miller had been behind it since the beginning. This all pointed to what we can say is a lack of confidence in what Lord and Miller were essentially trying to do if we maybe got to a point where we could have seen the full product in the end. Maybe what they were going for would have worked. We have no idea because they didn't get to finish the full production. Instead, they were replaced and we had to go with this sort of cobbled together idea of what a Star Wars movie was going to be. We saw a similar thing with Rogue One as Gareth Edwards was replaced by Tony Gilroy, but that was only really found out last minute, especially in terms of the wider populace catching on. There weren't all sorts of headlines and different media pieces being put together as to how much of a disaster Solo was going to be. We kind of just let Rogue One carry forward, even though if you go back to when Gilroy entered the project, it was at one of the most crucial stages, i.e. the editing and the bringing together of the product in the end. Regardless, Solo just didn't have that level of confidence. We didn't want to let it come together. We didn't really buy it from the beginning. I mean, I certainly didn't. And it kind of just paid dividends in the end. No one wanted to see it at the beginning. We weren't convinced throughout the marketing, and the final product speaks for itself. Number 4, the boycott. Now everything combined and contorted to make Solo one of the most easily boycottable Star Wars films of all time. Regardless of what you think of The Last Jedi, at least there were bold choices in there, and there were things that were being done to arguably try and push the very fabric of the franchise forward. Solo didn't have any of those things, and you can also argue that it was just trying to cash in on Han Solo. So, the majority of the fans who didn't want that in the first place organized the boycott. It may not have been one of the biggest factors in destabilizing Solo's hype, but the fact that the boycott Solo movement was even a story is an indication of something in itself. Basically, if you were on the boycott side where you were like, I didn't like The Last Jedi, I don't like the direction that Disney's taking the franchise, Disney did nothing to course correct in that regard, and the boycott movement just kind of continued to gather steam. Number 3, it's not an event movie. Now this one's quite self-explanatory. Obviously Solo isn't one of the episodic movies, and that kind of hurt it in the long run. And even Rogue One had the ability to plug into the end of A New Hope, and maybe you could argue that it kind of benefited from being the first of the Star Wars stories to sort of, add on to the established canon. Solo, an origin story to a character that we already feel like we know inside out, there was just nothing there. Now all of this affects the way that we view Star Wars overall. Disney are obviously behind both properties, but look at the MCU, look at the amount of Solo stories and group things and all those things that eventually come back around to form collective event movies like Infinity War. Star Wars didn't start out like this, and trying to course correct it and shape it into being this shared universe is jarring with fans. It means that we have movies like Solo that feel inconsequential, and we have other ones like the episodes that feel like the main movies. As much as there are Marvel fans that go out of their way to watch every single superhero movie, there are also those that don't, that, will skip the likes of Ant-Man and Doctor Strange, and will only come back for the main ones. However much of a part this played in the box office is, to some degree, up for debate, but at no point did they make it feel like Solo was an essential thing to the Star Wars mythos. Number 2, the critical reactions. Now, the critics' reactions were actually totally fine. We ended up giving it like a 2.5 star to 3 star mix. It's very much a 5 or a 6 out of 10. Serviceable, fun, does its job, a fine time in the cinema with nothing to really take away unless you want to get lost in the spoilers, in which case check out the videos that we already have online. Currently, Solo's Rotten Tomatoes score is sitting on 70%, which isn't that bad, it's still fresh. But 70% is a dangerous number because of the precedent. Attack of the Clones, which was memorably panned and still continues to be, scored 66%. The Phantom Menace scored 55%. It's all a little too close for comfort, and the fans notice these things. And number 1, it's still not a story that needed to be told. No matter how much you watch Solo and convince yourself that you're seeing the arc of Solo from the beginning where he's a younger child on Corellia all the way through to when he starts getting more facial smirks and acting a bit more like Harrison Ford, no part of Solo actively matters, really. If we're completely honest about ourselves, Han Solo very much starts out the movie as he ends it. At the beginning, he's, this young kid who's kind of out for himself. He's kind of smug and kind of knows what's best for himself, and that only carries through. We don't really see him learn to use his sense of humor or sense of self-preservation as a defense mechanism against any sort of unseen force or any wider world force. It's Han Solo. It's a guy doing a Han Solo impersonation at the beginning that gets gradually better as it goes along. And hey, that impersonation eventually started to get used to using different facial tics and smirks and ways that he sort of handles himself. There's nothing meaningful, there's nothing massive or identifiable. You couldn't show someone a clip from the beginning and go like, hey, that guy's meant to be Han Solo. And it just doesn't land in any sort of sense of the word. Sadly, Solo just demystifies Han in a really unsatisfying way, answering all sorts of mysteries and providing answers to questions that we didn't have, and if we did, we actually didn't want them answered. On top of all of this, every aforementioned point, you've got the fact that Alden Ehrenreich just isn't Harrison Ford. That's why the performance coach was brought in, and as much as Harrison Ford can give him his blessing and say, look, the guy did a really good job, I mean, I believe that Ehrenreich got stuck in and did do a good job as much as he could, but we don't look at him and see Han Solo. We just don't. No matter how good Ehrenreich was going to be, he wasn't going to be Harrison Ford, and he wasn't going to live up to those 30 years worth of expectations and character building that the majority of the fans were bringing to the table.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. Aren't you a star? Don't forget to subscribe below, and also the people who made this video, they're right here, so go and follow them and give them some love. If you want to see more content, there's probably some stuff flowing up above my head. Why not check it out? It could be fun. I'm not your dad.